just a minute. Meeting to order. Could I get a motion to approve the minutes of January 4th, please? Thank you, Ms. Duncan. Thank you, Ms. Daly. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes as submitted? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Same sign.
Aye.
Thank you. Do we need a motion to get her? Okay. Could I get a motion to allow Rachel in by phone, please? Mr. Fennell, Dr. Blair, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Thank you. Mr. Sorrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So under informational items, Springdale minutes are in your packet for you to review. Just one item of note specific to Springdale. The work group, which includes member Pastusha, the current chair of the authority board, Ms. Johnson, their executive director, Mr. Matuzak, the city manager, the executive director from the Park District, and myself continue to meet and work on crafting a new intergovernmental agreement. The existing 20-year-old intergovernmental agreement will expire in October, but language in that existing agreement says if the three governmental entities are going to enter into a new intergovernmental agreement because it's not able to be renewed any further than it already has been, we need to do that by mid-March. And so no need for a special board meeting, but expect at your meeting next month to see an intergovernmental agreement for action that will need to then go to the March County Board.
Thank you. Any comments for Scott? Seeing none, I will go to County Operations Committee report. Will the Vice Chair be reporting out on that?
We have two resolutions. One is to accept another $5,000 grant, which our director, Becky Spencer, has applied for and received, and this is for microchipping. The second resolution that we have, and that means, I might add, that anybody could bring an animal to the shelter and have it microchipped.
Very cool.
The second item is the Village of Princeville would like to step back their service level. So we will be asking you to approve entering in to a new contract with them, which reflects a much reduced service level of just basically impounding animals, but we would not be going out to Princeville to capture them. They'd have to bring them to the shelter for impounding. So those are our two items for the meeting.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Is the animal control director here, Becky? No. Mr. Sorrell, was this an issue of price or service quality?
I think a function of neither, Mr. Chairman, but actually scope of services. The Village of Princeville has done this in the past. And we normally typically see 6 to 9 months later, they come back and say, we'd like the full service option again.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Ms. Daly. I'll move on to the Infrastructure Committee report. Mr. Salzer.
Our committee met and we had only one resolution, which certainly is going to make many, many people happy because it has to do with a road being fixed out on Glen. And as most of you know, Glen, the entire road on Glen needs to be fixed. But we are sharing this with the city. The part that we are going to deal with will be from Sheridan over to Knoxville. That's about a half a mile, and the state of Illinois, of course, does not like to deal with a lot of different agencies, so we will be the lead agency on this. The city is going to be responsible for the design of this, the design of the construction on this particular road. And they also are responsible for the purchase of right-of-way items and so forth. We, of course, will be responsible for the entire construction of it, and it's going to cost us, I should say, the amount of money for us is a little over $1,700,000, but it's all going to come from like PUATs, and it's going to come from relief from COVID, as well as Rebuild Illinois, and motor fuel tax, of course, will play a major part of this in our situation. The bid letting, I think, is going to be in April, and it most likely won't be done until about 2023. We hope it gets done by then. But anyway, this is a well-needed project. The part that we are going to ask for is the use of $2,700,000 in this resolution, and it will be from the motor fuel tax, and this will be something that I think is going to benefit many people. So we certainly need this, and it'll be just a wonderful thing to get this project done.
Thank you, Mr. Salzer. Two exclamation points on we need to get this project done. I appreciate that. Mr. Fennell.
I happened to hear his meeting yesterday. I feel you haven't said it, but for the public, the city and the county are going to basically split the cost in two, so they're both sharing it. And then it'll be turned over to the city when it's completed. And taken off the county.
Thank you.
Any other comments for the
and
chairperson?
And that $2,700,000, that may not all be used because that's more so for a contingency fund.
Okay. Just in time for the new car wash to open, huh? Or
What?
there's a new car wash opening on that corner.
Is it? No. That's way down by University.
Oh, we're going from where to where?
Sheridan to Knoxville.
That's okay. Thank you. Thank you. Well, they can get a running start. Any other questions? Thanks for the clarification. Next chair to report would be the Ways and Means Chair.
This month we only had informational, no resolutions for the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Ricker. Mr. Dillon.
We had a couple zoning cases. So the first zoning case was Robert and Carol Meichner. And if you're heading out Farmington Road and remember the old Dubit Seeds, that's that property. They're separating that business from the surrounding farm acreage. So that passed unanimously. The next was a petition of Peoria County. It is not getting into our wind ordinance, but it is getting into the wind application structure. So it was making some recommendations to that. The fee part of it did not hit the paper in time, so we're gonna have to revisit that later. But there was like a noise ordinance. It's got the similar to what our solar, where you have to be bonded and have a deconstruction plan. So we were updating that with anticipation. This is not approving any wind agreements, but we do have some studies going in the county. To that point, I need to thank Andrew Kite, who is a member of the ZBA, for his extensive work. He's an attorney in town who does land use and government issues, and he was very instrumental in helping draft this language with best practices that he's seen around the state. So to that, I need to thank him. And then I know I've talked to many of you around it, and we had a pretty robust conversation about Airbnb properties. So we had so before I forget, the petition of Peoria County on the wind, there's a small PowerPoint that goes with that. Took a couple minutes. I did ask that that be part of the PowerPoint of our next meeting so that everybody on the board would have an understanding of what is being presented. Discussion of short-term rental, that was not an action item, but we did have a nice PowerPoint that was presented from ZBA with best practices. He had researched other states, and then he had comparisons from the municipalities around here, from East Peoria, Peoria, Chillicothe, Peoria Heights, about the different things. Some have registration fees, parking fees, all sorts of different things. So we had a discussion about that. The board had some discussion, and then we had citizens' remarks. So we had citizens speak. The only ones here has been an owner and their attorney. They spoke, cleared up some language. One of the suggestions from a letter that was given, and I believe it was in Roger John's motion to the board, was, and the homeowner agreed that that would be a best practice. If anybody stared at Airbnb, you might walk into the property and there's a sign on the house or a sign in the yard that identifies it and gives the number of the owner. That was something that was addressed. One of the petitioners on the past case said that that would be something that they would be willing to do, even though most of the neighbors do have their contact. But he made a good point of, if somebody's looking for the property, that's another way of identifying that property as the right property when you would go in. We talked about the distancing, and so really, other than two properties that are 3 houses apart or a couple 100 feet apart from each other, most of them are over a 1/4 mile apart anyway. So we had a map on the board of showing all the locations. There's about 2 more that got filed complaints on them here recently, so that would bring the total of 14 that we know about. 4 have been approved, 2 are in the process of getting approved, and 2 are in hearings right now. So that makes 8 out of the 14 that we know about. It was discussed in consultation with planning and zoning and the state's attorney's office. Those other 6 that we know about, we are not actively going out and saying you're in violation of the special use ordinance. Planning and zoning has always been a complaint-driven department, so we were going to leave it at that. One of the concerns that was brought up is that maybe our original ordinance of the bed and breakfast, which is this is following under, was too restrictive in the sense of logging. We're basically trying to log everybody that showed up into that property, and that maybe we just, when you apply to Airbnb or VRBO, the homeowner can print off a list of who rented that, their address, where they're from, their email, their phone number. So maybe that would be sufficient we're not looking at changing the ordinance of that, but that would be like a definition clarification, part of the ordinance. So I think the consensus yesterday was not to over legislate and start to create boundaries or anything else, but continue to listen and see. One of the concerns was about being able to revoke these. And if you recall, basically the last special use amendment in all of these is the county has the authority at any time to revoke that special use. So it was over an hour conversation between those two cases, and I'd say it was probably a 45 minutes worth of discussion of Airbnbs, and we did have other members in participation. So I think we had a good dialogue, and that takes some suggestions moving forward, but nothing, I would say, groundbreaking from what we're already doing. We did have one letter submitted that we read into public record, an objection with some ideas, basically from not approving them all or making a bunch of restrictions. So hopefully that addresses some of the concerns of the members, and we had a public meeting in regards to it, and some of the email concerns of whether or not we actually had a robust conversation about Airbnbs. I think we addressed a good chunk of that yesterday, and I appreciate Mr. Fennell including his dialogue, since a majority of these have been on River Beach. And a good point was brought up about majority of these properties on River Beach are Mossville's across the street, so they're Caterpillar people renting them. You have the giant soccer field there. You have Detweiler Park. You have sporting events at the Chillicothe Park District with basically two hotels, a motel and a hotel in Chillicothe, which has no regulations of these Airbnbs. And then your next is up to Grand Prairie. I think he said about 80% of his rentals, and he had over 300 rentals in the one property, are basically family members or people staying for those type of reasons at the property, that it's not as much tourism or anything, but there was a demand for these types of uses. So I think he said in Chillicothe there was, what, 2, Mr. Fennell, that they know of, and they have no regulations on them. So happy to answer any questions. I'm sure I'm leaving something out of that conversation, but that is the majority of what we discussed yesterday.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon. Questions, Ms. Bastuccia?
I know we've talked about how we're not allowed as a county to impose taxes on this, such as a hotel, which, brings in a lot of tax income for the city. Has there been any thought to a fee structure, or is there a fee for registering as an Airbnb?
So we initially had that discussion right off the bat, and it's a little counterproductive at the moment, because talking to some other municipalities, they charge like $100 to be registered, or in like the Heights, they have to be registered as a rental property and then have inspections every 3 years. If you're talking to some other municipalities' staff, the consensus was that the nominal fee of $100 to register isn't worth the time or effort to go around and continually say you need to pay that fee. Once they've registered and in proper rules and regulations of being a special use property, we know and have identified what properties they are. And right now we're talking about, in the entire Peoria County, about 15 or less. So right now we were not looking into having some sort of registration fee, because that is something else we have to collect, go after. By the time you do the mailings and try to collect all that, time and resources of staff that for that nominal of a fee is not really worth the time.
Ms. Daly?
I want to thank Member Dillon, because I had 2 people contact me, and I talked with him. He was very willing to have this discussion and an opportunity for the public to have input, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Daly. Thank you, Mr. Dillon. Others? Mr. Fennel?
We met, we had no resolutions, we just reviewed the papers that we were given in our packet.
Thank you. Any questions for Member Dillon, Chairperson Dillon? All right, miscellaneous. Starting on my right, Mr. Salzer.
I was going to ask this because I think it pertains to the fact that this committee is responsible for all of our committees. And I've been wondering, because I know it was one of the it was going to be a big earth-moving project. And the presentation by Chris Calder in regards to our landfill and the movement of dirt out there, and with this new company taking over, Scott, do we still have a green light going on that particular project that he mentioned, that he discussed with the committees and so forth?
Yes, Mr. Salzer. With PDC's acquisition, the purchaser will assume all the responsibilities that PDC has been contractually obligated to for the operation of what we'll colloquially known as Landfill 3, but it's now PCCL Inc. So that'll continue to go forward. They'll continue to operate the city's waste hauling and recycling contract, and there really shouldn't be any disruption of service for our citizens.
Thank you, because that's a huge project. I mean, and they were supposed to start around April, and I was just wondering, I don't know when they're going to open their bids on their contract to do that work out there and so forth.
Mr. Dillon?
Yeah, I should have asked this earlier, Chairman, when you were discussing it, just so I can prepare myself for when this comes. But I know we've had a robust conversation of Springdale off and on in the past. Couple things to prepare myself for that vote. Is there a consensus that that's even an agreement that we still want to go forward with? And two, I believe that number is 80,000. Is that the number that we would be staying at, or
Is that the number they've asked for?
Was it 50,000?
I think it's 50 is in
50?
the current agreement.
I didn't
Currently
remember
it's
if it's
60 a year.
60.
60, that's
So
what
will
I
we be
thought.
staying at our current number, or was that looking to be adjusted for inflation? I'm not saying I'm against this at the moment. I'm just trying to grasp some more information prior.
Mr. Sorrell, do you have a position on this?
Happy to share, and I'm sure Member Pastucha will be happy to supplement anything that I say or correct anything that I misstate. So the working group that I articulated earlier in the meeting continues to work on the terms and conditions. They include not just the annual payment or what the maximum exposure for each unit of government might be, but also includes membership on the Management Authority Board and the future of the Savannah, which is an important component for the Park District. The current version as it stands, which is going to be modified when next we meet, which is next week. Is it Wednesday or Thursday? Tuesday. One day next week. The work group will be getting back together. As it stands going into that meeting, which I'm pretty sure it will be different going out of that meeting, but as it stands right now, the city would continue to have, or would have 4 members. As is currently written, the chair of the Management Authority Board is always one of those 4 members. We would have 3 members, and the Park District would have 2 members. The change there on the membership side is the proposal is to flip the relationship with the foundation and actually structure it similar to how the Park District Board and their foundation is structured, where it goes from the policymaking body, in this case the Management Authority Board, to the foundation, which is the exact opposite of how it is today. So the foundation would potentially, or would be looking to lose that seat. Financially, the way it is written right now is the maximum exposure for the Park District would be $40,000. our maximum exposure would be 110,000. The city's exposure is everything past that. In the 20 years, they've been running roughly a $350,000 annual deficit. So it does lessen to a degree the amount that the city is going to be responsible for, and shifts some of that to us. The first 80,000 of that deficit, though, is still split under the current arrangement, which is we split it 50-50 with the Park District. And then if there's additional deficit after that, then we would go up to our maximum contribution of 110, which means the combined maximum contribution between the county and the Park District would be 150. If for some reason operations turn themselves around and the deficit would be such that the city would be paying less to support those deficits than either one of us, the county or the Park District, then that reduced deficit would be proportionally split based on the membership component of the Management Authority Board. And then, even though it's not currently written in there, in the agreement that's expiring, it's not written there, but it's written into the new agreement, in anticipation and hope that there would actually be any profits, the Management Authority would be able to keep those profits and dump them back into the cemetery, whether that be for future operations or for capital improvements that they might have. Kate, did I leave anything out? Okay.
One question I have is, would you like to have some sort of presentation to, a lot of people may be completely unfamiliar with the situation and how we got into the intergovernmental agreement 20 years ago. If you think it would be helpful, we could put a presentation together.
Which committee is this reporting through to you?
This one.
So, yes, that would be.
As far as timeline, Scott, when would that need to?
Well, the three bodies have to have the agreement approved by the legislative body, County Board, City Council, Park Board, by essentially our March County Board meeting. So that presentation would most likely come along with the resolution with the new IGA to the February Executive Committee meeting. So in 1 month.
Good question, Jimmy. I know I've been having some conversations about it with some of the members of that body.
Two other questions to follow up on that then, Scott. So all parties currently in the agreement have agreed to stay in the agreement. So the Park District is not going to bail.
I don't think any of that is concluded yet.
So then the last question for this on this, what's the length of this agreement, and will we still have out clauses like we've had in the current agreement? This is not a perpetual agreement, is it?
So the way the current version of the new agreement is written is it's for another 20-year period. If once we get to year 21, it could automatically renew on an annual basis unless one of the three bodies wants to get out. One of the three bodies can get out at any point in time with a 1-year notice, and the working group right now has language in there that would have the financial penalty for getting out to be 3 times your maximum annual exposure. Today, that number is a set flat dollar amount, so it doesn't matter what your contribution is, and I don't recall off the top of my head what the expiring agreement dollar value is, but it's the same concept, but the dollar value is different. Term is 20 years, so happy to answer any other questions.
So then I don't see the incentive in increasing our number if the penalty's 3 years, so you go to be 330,000 if I'm following that right. But how did we get from going to 50 to 110?
I would say that's just a function of the negotiations of the work group and based on feedback during those negotiations and during those meetings. I don't know, Kate, if you want to, is there anything you want to add to that?
I know that I've had some discussions about, the situation with Springdale is that the previous owners were mishandling the cemetery, embezzling funds, selling cannons, monuments, things like that. So the state stepped in and took over. Someone needed to own it, and so that's where the IGA came from. The city said that they would own the property, but they wanted help from the county and the park district as well financially, and so then the board was created reflecting that balance. We've had some discussions about, it is a city property. The cemetery does lie within the city, but as a functioning cemetery that's open for business, it doesn't just draw from, city residents. It draws from the surrounding area. And so we took that into consideration when, and quite frankly, the city's in a better financial position than the city is, and I think that has to do with it too.
Mr. Fennell?
I just curious, this body that here, if we do it in February and it's for a March final meeting, we'll almost have to rubber stamp it. It's like if somebody wants to say, put a vote up and say we want a 10-year agreement instead of a 20-year, do we have time to implement that?
I think we will have all the time we need to get the agreement that we want.
Okay.
I would just say that to you from my perspective as your chairperson. I appreciate Mr. Dillon bringing this up. I tend to know where he's coming from on the subject, but I didn't realize the pendency of the agreement was
I just don't want it to be that we're
clicking.
rubber stamping and sending it on.
No, because that'll result in a fractious kind of a conversation, which I don't think we need to have on such a terrific community asset. I would tell Kate that while it does lie within the city, it also lies within the county. It's in your district, and the nature of the fees or guarantors and the size of the guarantees they've had over time was a function of how poor the conditions were some 20 years ago. With what the team today has accomplished just in the decade I've been involved through the county board, it's not even the same enterprise. But we have to make a fresh decision about how we see it going forward, which is the part I would defer to Mr. Dillon's thoughts on, is why do we want to still be in this business today? So aside from the community effort that we're a part of here, it's important, I think, that we recognize an awful lot of result has come from the Springdale Cemetery Board, save perhaps the foundation not being successful or effective at raising the funds it was supposed to. And I think that's a conversation that always rubs some people a little bit the wrong way, and they have some seats on the board of directors. So there's something being discussed outside this room that I'm not privy to. I think now that we're all speaking about it, I wish somebody would be getting in there talking about the county's interests, raising the penalty threefold for early withdrawal. I don't know many banks that even require that for your money market account, and they don't like early withdrawal either. Mr. Dillon.
That's one of the things that's bothering me in that statement of, and it's nothing against Scott or Kate, but we're going from 50 to 110, and then you're increasing that to a 330. The city's not negotiating from strength on this standpoint. I mean, we're doing a favor by increasing that amount of money, and then to have that type of penalty put on us for increasing our contribution. I'm not saying that I'm opposed to giving a contribution to Springdale. There's a lot of good people on that board that work very hard, and it's important to this community. But help me understand how going from 50 to 110, That $60,000 is an employee at this courthouse, basically. And you're going into another agreement for 20 years and then increasing, if 5 years, if we enter into something like COVID again in our finances and we're laying off people and we've committed to something like this, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Was the original agreement indexed by a COLA or inflation, or was it indexed by any number?
It's not indexed whatsoever.
So with a passage of 20 years' time, what is $50,000 worth? So I would just say that to you. It's not a really well-done agreement as it currently exists because it wasn't tied to anything. What it was tied to was the emergency need for 3 governments to pool their funds together to restore a gem that was in serious financial trouble and had been largely mismanaged by the privateers that had it. So I don't like to see contracts that don't have some discussion of what they're tied to. Even our labor agreements, are always tied to some kind of an index or a known delta from year over year. Ms. Pastucci, I'll give the floor back to you and see if you could wrap this up for us.
Yeah, so to answer your question about inflation, so $60,000 is our current annual contribution, and so an inflation adjustment of that would be $90,000 in today's dollars. So increase that Scott was talking about, we have not determined what numbers are the final numbers yet. We're still discussing that. So, but to answer your question about inflation, it would be $90,000 today's dollars.
I appreciate you having this conversation, Chairman, and letting
happy
us
to.
discuss. But I would just say that, not to Scott or Kate directly, but that this is us negotiating against ourselves here by increasing this number, that the city should not be dictating terms to us, because in reality, we could walk away from this agreement tomorrow, and it's the city's responsibility. And I represent part of the city, so I'm not looking to hurt the city, but you can go to every single one of our districts and see a cemetery in disrepair that has no dollars going to it. And Springfield's a wonderful facility. I just need to help me understand why these numbers are what they are, is basically what I'm getting at.
Thanks, Mr. Dillon. And that is true of many members in the room. Ms. Daly?
I am past president of the board, and I'm vice chairman of the Springdale board now. I am a city appointee to that board. My entire county board district, however, is located within the city of Peoria. And, to sort of address your question a little bit, Jimmy, I think that a 255-acre cemetery that has been in existence since 1855 has, but have to drive down the streets in Peoria or other places to see all the people who were founding fathers here. And I personally believe that makes it different, being on the National Register of Historic Landmarks. So I would just offer that, and I understand that there are certainly other cemeteries in town, but not any other ones quite like Springdale in terms of its historic significance with the people who for well over 150 years have been buried there. So that's what I would offer. And I don't waste money on anything. So I would not, the goal here is that the foundation raise money to get the endowment to the point where there won't need to be any subsidies.
Well, and one of the concerns I have per se is even the Park District in it is a big concern in West Peoria right now. Is the Park District has closed Franciscan Recreation Center. So them committing $40,000 to this, and their argument is basically, if we had an extra $30,000, we could keep that open. But they've cut services continually in West Peoria to where we don't have anything from the Park District, yet continue to contribute money to that tax base. I'm just trying to wrap my head around all of these parties getting money into it and make best sense of it. And I completely understand, Linda, and I'm willing to listen more, but I just don't want it to hurt where we're cutting services because we're continually funding this. And if they didn't get it right in the last 20, I don't know if that foundation is ever going to turn profitable.
Well, no, I think it was the condition 20 years ago in which they found the cemetery. Previous private owners had actually stripped everything of value and were not dealing with burials in an honorable fashion in terms of pre-need funds and many other things. So, you know, I think, as Chairman Rand indicated, I don't think Springdale has ever looked as good as it does now. But to keep 255 acres and all those monuments, et cetera, and the roads and trails in that kind of condition is incredibly expensive. There's no doubt about it.
Anyone else? Thank you both. Ms. Pastucia?
I just want to say, if you would like to talk about this more, Jimmy, or if anybody else has any other questions, to please contact me. I'd be more than happy to talk with anybody about it.
What is your cell phone number?
It's online.
Thank you. All right, we're still at miscellaneous. Ms. Pastucia?
Sorry, me again. So we had discussed it's time for Scott Sorrell's annual review and to be expecting that survey to come out, and we were ready to do that. And then we forgot one of the most important parts of that is that Scott does a self-evaluation as part of that, and I forgot that step. So Scott is going to try his hardest to get that out as soon as possible, and as soon as that happens, Gretchen will be sending you the link to the survey. You will have a passcode for that survey, and so that you can take that. And you should, if everything happens as planned, we'll still stay on the same time schedule to discuss this at the February board meeting, have a resolution for the February committee meetings, and a vote on the March board meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Dillon?
One last thing, so just so the whole entire board knows that wanted to thank Leonard Junis for his service on the ZBA. He submitted his letter of resignation. So the way the ZBA works is you get one representative from a township, and so it has to be from an open township. It is not the most glamorous committee. It pays $0, and it's during the middle of a work day. It's the morning of our county board meetings. So if you have somebody in mind, maybe a recently retired person that's looking to volunteer their time for something on that, please let Kathy, myself, or Andrew or Scott know if you have a name, and we can see if that township is available.
I think it'll be the Peoria Township, and I have a person who's agreed to serve.
Even better.
It'll be on this month's appointment list. A referral to me from Miss Duncan. A person who has the time. And anybody else? All right. Seeing none, we'd be adjourned. Thank you.